Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating text from January 2025 by an author named Sui Feng. He argues that a very specific type of communism isn't just possible, it's absolutely inevitable. If you've been following the massive debates around AI, universal basic income, or shifting global power dynamics, you are definitely going to want to hear this. He bases his sweeping conclusion on 8 logical deductions, and we're going to map out exactly how he builds this bold, highly specific argument right from the ground up.
Okay, let's dive right in by instantly challenging our preconceptions, because as the author makes crystal clear from the very start, his concept is totally different from any historical examples we've seen. Seriously, if you have a specific mental image when you hear that word, Sui Feng argues you need to just completely set it aside to understand the society he's predicting. The author explicitly states that his version is neither Marxist communism nor the systems pursued by global communist parties in the past. Instead, he defines this as, quote, Sui Feng-style communism. He essentially equates this to the historical concept of a great harmony, which is a utopian ideal that he says sages have sought throughout human history. So, to make sense of his 8 logical deductions, which, by the way, range wildly from the role of Elon Musk to AI and even human biology, we've broken this down into 6 areas. We've got defining the concept, technology as catalyst, human nature and freedom, the shift in power, the life-genuine model, and finally, the ultimate societal evolution. All right, Section 1, defining Sui Feng-style communism as a non-coercive concept. Let's see what Sui Feng actually means when he uses this heavily loaded term. According to the text, we absolutely must not misunderstand this society as some terrifying monster or coercive movement. Sui Feng states it doesn't involve the forced confiscation of private property, nor does it rely on aggressive political campaigns. Instead, he promises it's a life of freedom and fulfillment that far surpasses traditional lifestyles, and honestly even far surpasses the lives of the wealthy today. The whole shebang is built entirely on natural, voluntary participation. Moving on to Section 2, Technology as the Catalyst. Covering deductions 1 and 3, the author argues that modern technology is the primary driver forcing this massive societal shift. Here we group his first and third deductions, which focus heavily on how the internet, artificial intelligence, and automation make this new society practically unavoidable. In Jin Feng's view, we aren't just philosophically drifting toward this state, we are literally being technologically engineered right into it. For his first deduction, the author argues that humans simply cannot live without the internet or somehow surpass artificial intelligence. He claims that internet programs inherently follow a communist framework just because they're fundamentally built on shared information. Plus, he argues the values embedded in AI are universal, bringing this global perspective to the table. Therefore, the inherent nature of these technologies will inevitably force a global unification. Now, what's truly staggering here is the sheer scale of the author's third deduction regarding automation. It's built around a massive 90% figure. Sui Feng predicts a very near future where human labor becomes overwhelmingly obsolete. Let's look at how he breaks down that logic. Sui Feng maps out a very clear 3-step progression. First, robots replace human tasks until they actually outnumber us. Second, this leads to a staggering 90% unemployment rate. And finally, step 3, societies are left with absolutely no choice but to provide universal welfare for the unemployed. By doing so, humanity effectively pushes itself right into this communist state out of pure necessity. It's like a massive domino effect. All right, on to Section 3, Human Nature and Freedom, covering deductions 2 and 4. Here, we shift gears completely from the realm of technology to the author's views on human biology, psychology, and our deepest desires. In his second and fourth deductions, Sui Feng claims that our intrinsic biological cravings for 2 specific things, borderless movement and interpersonal variety, will naturally dismantle our current foundational societal structures. For deduction 2, he points to the Schengen area in Europe, where 29 countries operate without internal borders, as concrete proof that humanity is trending toward universal visa-free policies. The pursuit of freedom, of relocation, is just intrinsic to human nature, he says. He argues that when global border controls eventually vanish, his version of a globally unified communism will just naturally be realized. And this leads right into his highly controversial fourth deduction. Sui Feng asserts that human nature inherently craves novelty and variety, specifically pointing to sexual relationships and intimacy. He argues that, fueled by the internet and global mobility, people are increasingly reluctant to have only one partner for life.
Instead, he thinks they'll abandon traditional, lifelong monogamy to satisfy an inherent desire for diverse, cross-racial intimacy. This, he claims, will fundamentally alter the family unit and pave the way for his proposed society. Which brings us to Section 4, the shift in power. Deductions 6 and 7 outline how all of this builds into a radical restructuring of global power dynamics. Su Feng's 6th and 7th deductions assert that traditional government structures are actively collapsing in favor of a new type of entrepreneurial leadership, fundamentally rewiring who actually holds the reins of power. The author presents a stark contrast between governments and visionary entrepreneurs, using Elon Musk as his prime example. Xu Feng argues that governments primarily seek to maintain power, resulting in a very limited, narrow perspective. On the flip side, while entrepreneurs seek to generate profit, they inherently possess a global vision. According to the text, this means capital in the hands of entrepreneurs actually benefits the public far more effectively than when controlled by governments. Tying this back to technology for Deduction 6, Zeffing notes that authoritarianism relies heavily on strict control of public opinion through media monopolies. But because the internet and AI cannot be fully controlled by these traditional structures, decentralized information is taking over. He concludes this will trigger the inevitable collapse of authoritarian regimes entirely, leaving visionary entrepreneurs to guide humanity forward. Okay, Section 5, the Life Shenwan model. After all this theory, you might be wondering, does the author have any proof this actually works in practice? Well, Deduction 5 provides his answer. In Deduction 5, Zifeng points to a real-world proof of concept that he himself actually created. He states that before 2009, true communism had never been witnessed, but in 2009, the Life Shenyuan home was established. He argues that its continuous flourishing over the last 17 years acts as a living demonstration. For the author, this community proves that this model is a lifestyle far superior to traditional family and marriage-based living, asserting that as more people experience it, the idea will inevitably spread globally like wildfire. And finally, Section 6, the ultimate societal evolution. This brings us to the author's 8th deduction and his grand conclusion for the future of humanity. The author insists that from the primitive era to the present day, societal evolution follows an unstoppable upward trajectory. The transition from barbarism to civilization is a fundamental rule for him, and he makes a really bold declaration here. The highest form of human civilization at the very end of this evolutionary road is neither socialism nor capitalism, but Shuafeng-style communism. He officially defines this ultimate state as the Great Harmony. The defining characteristic here is that it's a completely non-coercive society with global unity and immense individual fulfillment. Shufeng's entire premise is that this isn't forced upon humanity at all. Rather, it's something people will willingly, naturally, and joyfully embrace once they recognize its undeniable advantages. This brings us to the end of his text. We're going to leave you with the author's own poetic summary of his theory. He describes this societal shift emerging gradually and naturally, quote, like spring rain nourishing the earth. So we have to ask you, based on these 8 deductions, whether driven by the inescapable rise of AI, our biological desires for novelty, or the limits of government, is this global great harmony truly inevitable, or is it just a utopian mirage? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you in the next one.